The gunshot echoed across the dusty main street of Redemption Springs, causing Knox Blackwood to instinctively reach for his Colt. His fingers relaxed when he realized it was just the blacksmith hammering away, the sound reverberating off the wooden buildings in a way that mimicked gunfire. Knox pulled his hat lower over his eyes as the relentless Arizona sun beat down, making the summer of 1876 nearly unbearable for anyone foolish enough to be out at high noon. Knox had wandered into Redemption Springs 3 days prior, his reputation preceding him like an unwelcome shadow. The locals whispered about the notorious gunslinger who'd hung up his outlaw ways to become a bounty hunter, a man whose cold blue eyes had seen more death than the Undertaker himself. Women in town cast hopeful glances his way, from the banker's daughter with her lace parasol to the saloon girls with their painted smiles, but Knox's gaze slid past them all, uninterested. "Mr. Blackwood," the hotel proprietor called out as Knox strode past. "Telegraph came for you this morning." Knox nodded curtly, taking the paper without breaking stride. Another bounty, no doubt. Another man to track, another soul to bring to justice or to send to an early grave. It had become a monotonous cycle, one that left him feeling hollow inside, like a man who'd forgotten how to feel anything beyond the cold satisfaction of a job completed. The telegram was brief. "Suspected Jennings gang member headed your way, $500 reward, Sheriff Thompson." Knox pocketed the paper, his mind already calculating the best vantage points to watch the town entrances. The Jennings gang had been terrorizing banks and trains across 3 territories. Bringing one in would make a significant dent in their operations. He continued down the street toward the livery stable, intent on checking on his horse, a magnificent black stallion named Shadow. The animal was one of the few living things Knox had allowed himself to care about in recent years. "You planning on staying much longer, Mr. Blackwood?" The stable boy, no more than 16, looked up from mucking out a stall. "Depends," Knox replied, running a hand along Shadow's muscular neck. "Got some business to attend to first." "Ma says men like you bring trouble," the boy continued, either too young or too foolish to recognize when someone wasn't interested in conversation. "Says you've got the look of a man who's seen too much." Knox's silence was answer enough, and the boy returned to his work. After ensuring Shadow had fresh water and oats, Knox made his way to the sheriff's office. The local lawman, a graying veteran named Martin, had been initially wary of Knox's presence, but had warmed slightly when he learned of the bounty hunter's legitimate credentials. "Blackwood," Sheriff Martin acknowledged as Knox entered. "Got the telegram, I assume?" "I did. Any signs of Jennings' men?" Martin shook his head. "Nothing yet, but Stage is due in tomorrow. If he's coming, that'll likely be how." Knox nodded, his mind already forming a plan. "I'll keep watch." "Discreetly. Appreciate that. Town's been peaceful lately. Like to keep it that way." As Knox turned to leave, Martin added, "Town socials tonight at the church. Might do you good to attend, meet some folks who aren't looking at the wrong end of your gun barrel." Knox nearly laughed at the suggestion. Social gatherings were for men with futures, men who hadn't left pieces of their souls scattered across blood-soaked battlefields and dusty streets. Instead, he merely tipped his hat and stepped back into the blinding sunlight. The remainder of the afternoon passed slowly. Knox positioned himself on the hotel's second-floor balcony, where he could observe the town's comings and goings while remaining relatively inconspicuous. His weathered journal lay open on his lap, various notes about wanted men and their known associates filling the pages. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the main street, Knox watched the townspeople preparing for the evening social. Women in their best dresses, men in clean shirts and polished boots, all putting on airs for a few hours of respite from the harsh realities of frontier life. Against his better judgment, Knox found himself changing into his least worn shirt, a deep blue that had once matched his eyes before years of squinting into desert suns had faded them both. He told himself he was merely maintaining his cover, that attending the social would allow him to observe anyone new in town without raising suspicion. The church was the largest building in Redemption Springs, its white steeple visible from anywhere in town. As Knox approached, the sounds of a fiddle and piano drifted through the open doors, along with the murmur of conversation and occasional laughter. He hesitated at the threshold, suddenly feeling out of place. "Mr. Blackwood, how delightful," Mrs. Porter, the baker's wife, exclaimed upon seeing him. "We didn't expect you to join us." "Just passing through," Knox muttered, accepting the cup of punch she thrust into his hands. The social was exactly as he expected. Ladies clustered in groups, evaluating potential suitors, men discussing cattle prices and the upcoming harvest, children darting between adults until sharp looks from parents reined them in. Knox positioned himself against the far wall, observing. Several women approached him throughout the evening. The widow Johnson, with her not-so-subtle hints about her loneliness. Miss Edwards, with her talk of needing a strong man to help run her father's store, and at least 3 of the saloon girls who had apparently been invited in a gesture of Christian charity. Knox was polite but distant with each of them. Their interest wasn't in him, not really. They saw a tall, capable man with broad shoulders and a dangerous reputation. They saw security in a land that offered precious little of it. None of them saw Knox, the man who woke in cold sweats from dreams filled with the faces of those he'd killed. The man who couldn't remember the last time he'd felt anything resembling peace. As the evening wore on, Knox's patience waned. He was about to make his exit when the church doors swung open, bringing with them a gust of evening air and a woman Knox had never seen before. She stood in the doorway, slightly out of breath as though she'd hurried to arrive. Her simple dress, a deep forest green that complemented her olive skin, was nothing extraordinary. But the way she carried herself made Knox straighten from his slouched position against the wall. "So sorry I'm late, everyone," she called out, her voice carrying across the room with a musical quality that seemed to silence the very fiddles. The delivery wagon had a broken wheel just outside of town. "Tabitha Young," Sheriff Martin said beside Knox, having appeared without the bounty hunter noticing, a testament to how thoroughly the newcomer had captured his attention. "Doc Young's niece. Came to town last month to help her uncle with his practice." Knox couldn't tear his eyes away. It wasn't that Tabitha Young was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen, though her features were striking, with high cheekbones and full lips that curved naturally upward at the corners. It was something else entirely, something in the way her intelligent eyes scanned the room, missing nothing, something in the confident set of her shoulders, something in the way she seemed completely comfortable in her own skin. When her gaze met his across the crowded room, Knox felt as though someone had landed a physical blow to his chest. For the first time in years, he felt a stirring of something that wasn't duty or vengeance or the cold calculation of a hunt. It was interest, pure, simple, and utterly terrifying. "Might want to close your mouth before you catch flies, Blackwood," the sheriff chuckled, clapping him on the shoulder before moving away to greet other guests. Knox watched as people flocked to Tabitha, the men offering drinks, the women drawing her into their circles. She smiled and laughed with everyone, but there was something guarded in her expression, something that suggested she was as much an observer of this social ritual as Knox himself. "You're staring," a female voice said beside him, and Knox turned to find one of the saloon girls, Ruby. He recalled looking at him with amusement. "I'm observing," Knox corrected. "It's what I do." Ruby laughed, a genuine sound unlike the practiced giggles she used to entice customers at the saloon. "Well, your observing is about as subtle as a locomotive. Every woman in this room noticed the moment you stopped paying attention to the rest of us and focused on her." Knox frowned. "I'm not save it," Ruby interrupted, not unkindly. "She's different, that one, not just another pretty face in a town full of desperate women. She's got learning, reads medical books, helps the doc set bones and deliver babies. Heard she even performed surgery on a minor last week when her uncle was too drunk to hold the knife steady." This information only intensified Knox's interest. A woman with intelligence and practical skills was rare enough on the frontier. one with the courage to cut into human flesh to save a life was rarer still. "You should talk to her," Ruby suggested, giving him a gentle push, "before every other unattached man in town beats you to it." Knox hesitated. He wasn't in Redemption Springs to court a doctor's niece. He was here to capture a dangerous criminal, collect his bounty, and move on to the next job. Getting involved with a local woman, especially one who clearly had roots and purpose, would only complicate matters. And yet, when Tabitha excused herself from her current conversation and headed toward the punch table where Knox stood, he found himself unable to move away. "You must be Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice even more melodious up close. "I've heard quite a bit about you." "Not all bad, I hope," Knox responded, surprised to find his voice steady despite the unexpected fluttering in his chest. Her eyes, a warm amber color he'd never seen before, studied him with undisguised curiosity. "Some say you're a dangerous man. Others say you only bring danger to those who deserve it." She helped herself to a cup of punch. "I prefer to form my own opinions." "And what opinion have you formed so far, Miss Young?" A smile played at the corners of her mouth. "That you're a man who watches everything but reveals nothing. That you're comfortable with your gun but uncomfortable in social gatherings. And that despite your efforts to appear aloof, you're intensely aware of everyone in this room." Knox felt exposed in a way no opponent had ever managed to make him feel. "You've been observing me as well, it seems." "It's what I do," she replied, echoing his earlier words to Ruby with a slight twinkle in her eye that suggested she might have overheard their conversation. "Understanding people helps me treat them better. I'm not in need of treatment, Miss Young. Everyone needs healing of some kind, Mr. Blackwood, even those who believe themselves beyond it." She took a sip of punch, her eyes never leaving his. "I understand you're tracking a member of the Jennings gang." Knox tensed. "Sheriff Martin has a loose tongue. The sheriff didn't tell me. I overheard the telegraph operator discussing it with his wife." Tabitha shrugged apologetically. "Small towns have few secrets. Then you should know it's dangerous to associate with me. If Jennings' man recognizes me, things could get complicated." Instead of appearing frightened, Tabitha seemed intrigued. "Life on the frontier is inherently dangerous, Mr. Blackwood. I didn't come west expecting safety and tea parties." Before Knox could respond, the church doors burst open again. This time, a breathless young boy stood in the entrance. "Doc Young," he cried out, scanning the crowd until he spotted an elderly man with a silver beard. "It's Pa, mining accident, he's trapped, and there's blood everywhere." The old doctor swayed slightly as he stood, and Knox caught the distinct smell of whiskey as the man passed. Tabitha was already moving, gathering her skirts and heading for the door. "Uncle, you're in no condition," she said firmly but quietly. "I'll handle this." "Nonsense," the old man slurred. "I'm perfectly capable. Johnson needs you alive, not stumbling around his mine shaft," Tabitha insisted, her voice gentle but brooking no argument. She turned to the boy. "Tommy, run ahead and tell them I'm coming. Have someone boil water and gather clean cloths." As the boy darted out, Tabitha glanced back at Knox. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Mr. Blackwood. Perhaps we'll continue our conversation another time." Without thinking, Knox stepped forward. "I'll accompany you. Mining accidents can be treacherous and you might need an extra pair of hands." Surprise flickered across her face, quickly replaced by gratitude. "Thank you. We'll take my uncle's wagon. It has the medical supplies." The social dissolved into concerned murmurs as they departed, the festive mood broken by the reminder of how quickly tragedy could strike in their precarious existence. Outside, Knox helped Tabitha into the doctor's wagon, noting the organized cases of medical instruments and bottles of various remedies. As they set off toward the mines at the edge of town, the full moon illuminated the path, casting everything in silver light. "Have you assisted with mining accidents before?" Tabitha asked as she expertly guided the horses along the rutted road. 2 years ago in Colorado," Knox replied. "Cave-in trapped 3 men. I helped dig them out." "Did they survive?" Knox's jaw tightened at the memory. "One did." Tabitha nodded, understanding the weight of those words without need for elaboration. "Mining is dangerous work for poor pay, yet men keep doing it. Hope is a powerful motivator, Knox said. One good strike can change a man's life forever, or end it, Tabitha countered softly. They reached the mine entrance where a crowd had gathered, lanterns casting long shadows across worried faces. Tommy's father lay on a makeshift stretcher, his leg crushed beneath a fallen support beam inside the mine. 4 men had managed to free and carry him out, but the damage was severe. Knox watched in admiration as Tabitha transformed before his eyes. Gone was any trace of the sociable young woman from the church gathering. In her place stood a composed medical professional who calmly assessed the situation and began issuing directions to the miners. "I need more light," she instructed, kneeling beside the injured man. "And someone hold him down, this will be painful." Knox moved to the man's shoulders, placing firm hands there while Tabitha cut away the blood-soaked pant leg to reveal the mangled limb beneath. The miner's face was ashen, his breathing shallow. "Can you save it?" he gasped, fear evident in his eyes. Tabitha's expression remained steady as she examined the crushed bones and torn flesh. "I'm going to try, Mr. Johnson, but first I need to stop this bleeding." For the next hour, Knox assisted as Tabitha worked methodically to clean, set, and stitch what remained of Johnson's leg. Her hands never trembled, even when the miner screamed and thrashed despite Knox's restraining grip. When unconsciousness finally granted the man relief from pain, Tabitha let out a long breath. "The leg will need to come off," she said quietly, for Knox's ears alone. "But not here, not now. He's lost too much blood already. We need to get him back to town to a proper table where I can work." Knox nodded, impressed by her clinical assessment. "Will he survive the journey?" "He has to," she replied simply. "He has 4 children and a wife expecting another." As they loaded Johnson into the wagon, patting the injured leg with blankets to minimize movement, Knox found himself studying Tabitha's profile in the lantern light. Blood stained her sleeves to the elbows, and a streak of it marked her cheek where she'd brushed away a strand of hair. Yet she moved with purpose and confidence, displaying none of the squeamishness or hysteria often attributed to her sex. The ride back to town was tense, with Johnson drifting in and out of consciousness. Tabitha monitored his pulse constantly, occasionally administering drops of laudanum to ease his pain. "You're good at this," Knox observed as they neared town. "Better than many doctors I've encountered." Tabitha's smile was tired but genuine. "My father was a surgeon in Philadelphia. He taught me everything he knew, though it scandalized our neighbors. When he died, my mother insisted I come west to live with Uncle Edward. She thought frontier life would cure me of my unsuitable interests. And did it? Quite the opposite. Here, practical skills matter more than social conventions. Uncle Edward's hands shake too badly to perform surgery, so he taught me what he knows of frontier medicine to supplement my formal knowledge." She glanced at him. "People are often too desperate for help to care whether it comes from a man or a woman." They arrived at the doctor's office, a small building attached to a modest house on the edge of town. Several miners had ridden ahead to alert Mrs. Johnson, who waited anxiously on the porch, her pregnant belly protruding beneath her nightgown. "Tabitha," she breathed, her face pale in the moonlight. "Will he?" "Sarah, I need to amputate," Tabitha said directly but gently. "The leg is too damaged to save, but Thomas is strong. With proper care, he can survive this." The woman nodded, tears streaming silently down her face. "Whatever you must do." Knox helped carry Johnson into the surgery room, where an assistant, a young woman barely out of her teens, had already prepared the operating table and instruments according to instructions from the miners who'd ridden ahead. "Mr. Blackwood," Tabitha said as she rolled up her sleeves and washed her hands in a basin of carbolic solution, "I need you to hold him down. Even unconscious, the body fights against such invasion." Knox had seen amputations before on battlefields and in field hospitals during the war, in mining camps, and after train accidents in the years since. Few had been performed with the methodical precision Tabitha displayed as she tied off blood vessels, sawed through bone, and stitched muscle and skin into a neat flap. Throughout the procedure, she spoke quietly, explaining what she was doing to her assistant, teaching even as she fought to save a man's life. When it was finally done, and Johnson lay pale but breathing steadily on the table, Tabitha's professional demeanor cracked slightly. She stepped back, her hands trembling for the first time. "Lucy, prepare a bed in the recovery room," she instructed her assistant. "And inform Mrs. Johnson that her husband is stable for now." When they were alone, Knox watched as Tabitha braced herself against the washing basin, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "You did well," he said quietly. "Most surgeons I've seen would have lost him." She looked up, a flash of vulnerability in her eyes before her composure returned. "Thank you for your help. Few men would have volunteered as you did. Few women would have handled that situation as capably as you did," he countered. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "We make quite a pair, then, both exceeding the low expectations of others." The intimacy of the moment struck Knox suddenly standing in a room smelling of blood and carbolic acid, having just shared in the intense experience of fighting for a man's life. It created a connection he hadn't anticipated, one that unsettled him with its immediacy. "I should go," he said abruptly. "You have patients to attend to, and I need to be alert tomorrow when the stage arrives." If Tabitha was disappointed by his sudden withdrawal, she didn't show it. "Of course, thank you again, Mr. Blackwood." "Knox," he corrected before he could stop himself. "My name is Knox." Her tired eyes warmed. "Knox, then. Good night." He tipped his hat and stepped out into the cool night air, his thoughts in turmoil. Knox Blackwood didn't form attachments, not to places, not to people. Attachments were vulnerabilities, and in his line of work, vulnerabilities got you killed. And yet, walking back to his hotel room, he couldn't shake the image of Tabitha Young's steady hands and unwavering courage. Sleep eluded Knox that night. He lay awake, listening to the occasional sounds of the town, a dog barking, the night watchman calling the hour, distant piano music from the saloon that never quite closed. His mind kept returning to Tabitha, wondering if she'd managed to rest, or if she was still sitting vigil beside Johnson's bed. Dawn found him at his post on the hotel balcony, watching as the town slowly came to life. Shopkeepers swept their boardwalks, the blacksmith stoked his forge, and children ran errands for their parents before school. It was the normal rhythm of a frontier town, a rhythm Knox usually observed with detached interest, knowing he would soon move on. The stagecoach was scheduled to arrive at noon. Knox spent the morning cleaning his weapons and reviewing the wanted poster for James Keller, the suspected Jennings gang member he was tracking. Keller was reportedly posing as a cattle buyer, moving between towns to scout potential targets for the gang. At 11:30, Knox positioned himself on the hotel porch, seemingly relaxed in a rocking chair but with a clear view of the stagecoach stop. Sheriff Martin casually strolled over, pretending to check the bulletin board outside the hotel. "Any specific plans when he arrives?" The sheriff asked without looking at Knox. "Wait until he's settled, then take him quietly," Knox replied. "Less chance of civilians getting hurt that way." Martin nodded. "I've got 2 deputies standing by just in case." The stagecoach arrived precisely at noon, dust billowing around the team of 6 horses as the driver expertly brought them to a halt. 5 passengers disembarked: a middle-aged couple, a young man in clerical garb, an elderly gentleman, and a well-dressed man in his 30s who matched Keller's description. Knox watched as the suspected outlaw collected his luggage and headed toward the hotel. Perfect if Keller took a room, Knox could apprehend him there without causing a scene on the main street. As Knox rose to follow, movement across the street caught his attention. Tabitha Young emerged from the general store, a basket of supplies on her arm. She looked exhausted, dark circles visible beneath her eyes even from this distance, but she moved with purpose. The moment Keller spotted her, Knox saw a change in the man's demeanor. His relaxed posture tensed and his hand drifted toward his coat pocket. Knox's instincts flared. Keller wasn't just carrying a concealed weapon, he was preparing to use it. Tabitha, unaware of the danger, continued down the boardwalk toward the doctor's office. Keller altered his course, cutting across the street to intercept her path. Knox moved instantly, abandoning his plan for a quiet capture. "Keller," he called out, his voice carrying across the street. James Keller stopped right there. Everything happened in seconds. Keller spun, pulling a derringer from his pocket and firing wildly in Knox's direction. Tabitha dropped to the ground as townspeople scattered, screaming. Knox drew and fired in one fluid motion, his bullet striking Keller's shoulder and spinning him around. Despite the injury, Keller lunged toward Tabitha, grabbing her arm and yanking her upright to use as a shield. The derringer pressed against her temple. "Back off, bounty hunter," Keller shouted, blood spreading across his shirt from the shoulder wound. "Or the lady doctor gets a bullet in her brain." Knox froze, his Colt aimed steadily but uselessly while Keller used Tabitha as cover. The fear in her eyes cut through him like a knife, but beneath the fear was something else: determination and a silent communication. "Don't back down." "You're bleeding out, Keller," Knox said calmly, trying to draw the man's attention. "Let her go, and I'll make sure you get medical attention before you face the judge." "I ain't facing no judge," Keller snarled, dragging Tabitha backward toward the alley between the general store and the barber shop. "This little lady's my ticket out of town." Knox maintained his aim, looking for any opening, any moment when Tabitha wasn't perfectly covered by Keller's body. Sheriff Martin and his deputies had their weapons drawn as well, forming a semicircle that kept Keller contained but without a clear shot. What happened next surprised everyone, especially Keller. Tabitha suddenly went limp in his grasp, her full weight dropping unexpectedly. As Keller instinctively adjusted his grip, she drove her elbow hard into his wounded shoulder. The outlaw howled in pain, his gun hand jerking away from her head just long enough. Knox's bullet found its mark in Keller's chest before the man could recover. He crumpled to the ground, the derringer clattering on the boardwalk. Tabitha scrambled away, her face pale but composed as Sheriff Martin rushed forward to secure Keller, who was still breathing but barely conscious. "Are you hurt?" Knox demanded, reaching Tabitha in 3 long strides and helping her to her feet. She shook her head, though her hands trembled. "No, she stopped, taking a deep breath to steady herself. "I need to treat him." "What?" Knox couldn't believe his ears. "The man just tried to kill you, and now he's dying," Tabitha replied, her professional instincts overriding her fear. "Help me get him to the surgery room." Reluctantly, Knox assisted the deputies in carrying the wounded outlaw to the doctor's office. Tabitha worked quickly to stem the bleeding, though it was clear from her expression that Keller's chances were slim. "Why?" Knox asked when they stepped outside to give Tabitha's assistant space to clean the surgical instruments. "Why try to save the life of a man who held a gun to your head?" Tabitha looked at him steadily. "Because it's what I do, Knox. I don't get to decide who deserves healing and who doesn't." "He's a killer," Knox insisted. "Part of a gang that's robbed and murdered across 3 territories. And you've killed men for money," she replied, not unkindly. "Does that make you unworthy of care if you're wounded?" The question struck Knox like a physical blow. He'd never considered himself worthy of much of anything, certainly not the kind of compassion Tabitha showed even to her would-be murderer. "That's different," he muttered. "I bring criminals to justice. And I bring healing to the injured," she countered. "We each have our code, Knox." "I won't apologize for mine." Before he could respond, Lucy emerged from the surgery room, her young face solemn. "He's gone, Miss Tabitha." Hart gave out. Tabitha nodded, unsurprised but still saddened. "Thank you, Lucy. Please inform the sheriff." When they were alone again, Knox studied Tabitha's face, the strength there, the unwavering conviction in her principles despite what she'd just endured. Something shifted in his chest, a recognition of something rare and precious. "You're unlike anyone I've ever met," he said quietly. Her expression softened. "I could say the same about you." She hesitated, then added, "Will you be leaving now, with Keller gone?" The question hung between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Knox had planned to collect the bounty and move on to the next job, the next town, as he always did. But standing before Tabitha, the thought of riding away felt suddenly wrong. The telegram mentioned Keller was suspected of being part of the Jennings gang. Knox said slowly. I should verify his identity, maybe see if he was carrying anything that could lead to the rest of the gang. It was a thin excuse to stay, and they both knew it. Mr. Johnson will need ongoing care as he recovers, Tabitha offered, a slight smile playing at her lips. An extra pair of hands would be helpful around the surgery. I'm not much of a nurse, Knox warned. No, she agreed, her amber eyes warming. But you're steady in a crisis and apparently a good shot. Both are valuable qualities in Redemption Springs. The implications of her words settled between them, an invitation not just to stay for a few more days, but to consider something Knox had never allowed himself to contemplate, putting down roots. I could stay a while longer, he conceded, surprising himself with how right the decision felt. At least until Johnson's out of danger. Tabitha's smile widened, transforming her tired face. I think that's very wise, Mr. Blackwood. The following weeks brought changes to Knox's life that he could never have anticipated. He rented a small room above the gunsmith shop rather than continuing to stay at the hotel, a tacit acknowledgement that his presence in Redemption Springs was becoming less temporary. Sheriff Martin offered him a position as a part-time deputy. Could use a man with your skills, he'd said, especially with the bank shipment coming in next month. Knox accepted, finding that local law enforcement suited him better than the nomadic existence of a bounty hunter. Most evenings found him at the doctor's office, sometimes helping Tabitha with patients, sometimes simply sitting with her on the porch after her workday ended. They talked about everything and nothing: her childhood in Philadelphia, his experiences during the war, books they'd read, places they'd seen. Knox found himself sharing stories he'd never told anyone about the family he'd lost to typhoid as a young man, about the horrors he'd witnessed on Civil War battlefields, about the first time he'd killed a man and how it had changed him forever. Tabitha listened without judgment, offering insights that helped Knox see his past in a different light. In turn, she confided her own struggles: the constant battle for respect in a profession dominated by men, her complicated relationship with her alcoholic uncle, her fears that she was failing her patients when treatments didn't work. You ever think about going back east? Knox asked one evening as they sat watching a spectacular sunset paint the desert in shades of orange and purple. Practicing medicine in a proper hospital, Tabitha considered the question, her fingers absently tracing patterns on the arm of her rocking chair. Sometimes, she admitted. In Philadelphia, I could work with other doctors, learn new techniques, have access to better equipment. Knox's heart sank at the thought of her leaving, though he kept his expression neutral. But then, she continued, who would deliver Mrs. Peterson's babies? Who would set Tommy's broken bones when he falls from trees? Who would care for minors with crushed limbs? She shook her head. These people need me more than any city patients ever could. Relief washed through Knox, followed by admiration. Tabitha's dedication to her community, her willingness to sacrifice personal advancement for the good of others, only deepened his growing feelings for her. As summer turned to fall, Knox and Tabitha fell into a comfortable routine. They took Sunday afternoon rides together, exploring the breathtaking landscapes surrounding Redemption Springs. Knox taught Tabitha to shoot for protection, he insisted, though they both enjoyed the lessons far more than mere practical training warranted. Tabitha, in turn, taught Knox about medicinal plants and basic first aid, knowledge that had already proved useful when he encountered an injured traveler on the road to the next town. The townsfolk began to see them as a pair, inviting them together to dinners and social gatherings. Knox, who had always kept people at a distance, found himself gradually accepted into the community not as a dangerous bounty hunter passing through, but as a man with skills to contribute and a place to belong. One crisp October morning, Knox accompanied Tabitha on a house call to a remote ranch where a ranch hand had been gored by a bull. As they rode back to town, Tabitha suddenly pulled her horse to a stop, staring at something in the distance. Knox, she said urgently, pointing toward a plume of smoke rising from the direction of Redemption Springs. That's not chimney smoke, Knox's stomach tightened as he calculated the location. It's coming from near the bank. They spurred their horses, racing back to town to find chaos. The bank was indeed ablaze, flames licking at the wooden structure as townspeople formed a bucket brigade from the water trough. Sheriff Martin lay on the boardwalk, a bloodstain spreading across his chest while Doc Young knelt beside him, hands shaking too badly to apply proper pressure. "Uncle." Tabitha called, leaping from her horse and rushing to take over. "What happened, Jennings' gang?" the sheriff gasped as Tabitha examined his wound. "5 of them hit the bank," shot Peterson. The teller Knox surveyed the scene, noting the bank's shattered windows and the trail of hoofprints leading out of town. "Which way did they go?" "North," one of the deputies supplied, his arm hanging uselessly at his side from what appeared to be a bullet wound. "Toward Bitter Creek Canyon. They got all the mining payroll, nearly $10,000. Knox's mind raced. Bitter Creek Canyon had only one exit on the northern end. If the gang didn't know the area well, they might be trapped there. But he couldn't pursue them alone, and the town's law enforcement was in no condition to help. "Sheriff's losing blood fast," Tabitha reported, her hands red as she worked to extract the bullet. "I need to get him to the surgery room immediately." Knox made a quick decision. "I'll organize a posse. We can cut them off at the canyon exit." Tabitha looked up at him, fear evident in her eyes, not for herself, but for him. "Knox, there are 5 of them. And they killed a bank teller and shot the sheriff," he replied grimly. "They can't be allowed to escape." For a moment, it seemed Tabitha might argue, but instead she nodded. "Be careful," she said softly. "I'll be very cross if you return with bullet holes in you." The ghost of a smile touched Knox's lips. "I'll keep that in mind." Within an hour, Knox had assembled a posse of 8 men ranchers, shopkeepers, and miners who were determined to protect their town and recover the stolen payroll that many of them depended on. They rode hard toward Bitter Creek Canyon, taking a shortcut Knox had discovered during one of his Sunday rides with Tabitha. The strategy worked. They reached the northern exit of the canyon just as the Jennings gang emerged, laden with saddlebags full of cash and clearly unprepared for an ambush. The ensuing gunfight was brief but intense. 2 gang members fell immediately under the posse's well-aimed fire. A third surrendered when he realized their position was untenable. The remaining 2, including Calvin Jennings himself, attempted to flee back into the canyon. Knox pursued them alone, his superior horsemanship allowing him to gain ground in the treacherous terrain. When Jennings turned to fire at him, Knox's shot struck the outlaw's gun hand, sending his weapon spinning into the dust. "It's over, Jennings," Knox called, his Colt trained steadily on the notorious gang leader. "Throw down your weapons." The last gang member made the mistake of reaching for his rifle. Knox's bullet caught him in the chest before his hand closed around the stock. Jennings, seeing his last ally fall, slowly raised his uninjured hand in surrender. "You're making a mistake," Jennings snarled as Knox bound his wrists. "I've got friends, powerful friends, who will break me out before I ever see a gallows." "Maybe," Knox acknowledged, securing the outlaw to his saddle. "But that's for a judge to sort out, not me." The return to Redemption Springs was triumphant, all the stolen money recovered. 4 of the 5 gang members either dead or captured, and no casualties among the posse. As they rode down the main street, townspeople emerged from buildings to cheer. Knox's first thought was of Tabitha. He handed Jennings over to the remaining deputy and headed straight for the doctor's office, his heart pounding with an urgency that had nothing to do with the recent gunfight. He found her washing blood-stained instruments, her sleeves rolled up and her hair escaping its pins. When she looked up and saw him standing in the doorway, unharmed, the relief that flooded her face made his chest tighten. "Sheriff Martin?" he asked. "Stable," she replied, setting down the scalpel she'd been cleaning. "The bullet missed his vital organs. With rest and proper care, he should recover fully." She studied Knox's face. "And the Jennings gang, captured or dead," Knox reported, "all the money recovered." Tabitha nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. Then, to Knox's surprise, she crossed the room and threw her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. "I was so worried," she whispered. Knox stood frozen for a moment, unaccustomed to such displays of emotion directed at him. Then, slowly, he wrapped his arms around her, breathing in the scent of carbolic soap and something uniquely Tabitha. "I'm fine," he assured her, his voice rougher than usual. "Not a scratch." She pulled back slightly, looking up at him with eyes shining with unshed tears. "Good. Because I've realized something, Knox Blackwood, and I would have been very put out if you'd gotten yourself killed before I could tell you." "Tell me what?" he asked, though a part of him already knew had known, perhaps, since that first night at the church social when she'd walked through the door and stopped his heart. "That I love you," Tabitha said simply. "I didn't plan to. I certainly didn't come to Redemption Springs looking for a gunslinger with more scars than smiles. But here we are." The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable and terrifying in their implication. Knox had never allowed himself to imagine a future with anyone, had convinced himself that men like him didn't deserve the kind of happiness others took for granted. But standing in the surgery room with Tabitha looking up at him expectantly, Knox couldn't remember any of the reasons why he should deny them both the chance at something real. "I'm not good with words," he said finally, his hands gently cupping her face. "Never have been. But I haven't been able to think straight since the moment I saw you walk into that church social." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Tabitha Young. God help me, I do." Her smile was radiant as she rose on tiptoes, closing the distance between them. Their kiss was gentle at first, tentative, before deepening into something that made Knox forget everything: the gunfight, the years of solitude, even his own name, everything except the woman in his arms and the future suddenly opening before them. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Tabitha's eyes danced with happiness. "So, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her hands still resting on his chest, "does this mean you're planning to stay in Redemption Springs permanently?" Knox thought about the job offer from Sheriff Martin, about the small house at the edge of town that had just gone up for sale, about waking up each morning knowing exactly where he belonged and who he belonged with. "Yes, Miss Young," he replied, a rare, genuine smile spreading across his face. "I believe it does." Winter descended on Redemption Springs with unusual ferocity that year. Snow blanketed the desert landscape, transforming the harsh terrain into something magical. Knox had never spent a winter in one place before, always moving south when the northern territories became too cold. He found he enjoyed the novelty of watching the seasons change from the same porch, of becoming familiar with the rhythms of a single community as it adapted to nature's challenges. He had purchased the small house he'd been eyeing, spending his evenings repairing the roof and reinforcing the walls against the winter chill. Sheriff Martin had made his deputy position permanent after recovering from his wounds, giving Knox a steady income and a respected place in the community. Most importantly, his relationship with Tabitha had blossomed in the months following their mutual confession. They took dinner together most evenings, alternating between her uncle's home and Knox's new house. They attended church socials as a recognized couple, no longer drawing speculative glances from the townspeople on Christmas Eve. A blizzard howled outside while Knox and Tabitha sat before the fireplace in his newly furnished parlor. Doc Young had fallen asleep in the kitchen after too much holiday punch, his snores providing a rhythmic backdrop to their conversation. "I have something for you," Knox said, reaching into his pocket. "I was going to wait until tomorrow, but—" He pulled out a small, velvet-covered box, a luxury item he'd ordered specially from Denver. Tabitha's eyes widened as he opened it to reveal a simple gold ring set with a single, perfect sapphire. "It reminded me of the dress you wore the night we met," Knox explained, suddenly nervous. "That deep blue that made you stand out from every other woman in the room." Tabitha's fingers trembled as she touched the ring. "Knox, I know it hasn't been very long," he continued, the words tumbling out before he lost his nerve. "And I know I'm not the kind of man your parents probably hoped you'd marry. I've done violent things that I can't undo, but loving you has made me want to be better, to build something good with whatever years I have left." He took a deep breath. "Tabitha Young, will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Tabitha's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Knox Blackwood, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Knox felt a sense of peace he'd never known before. The ghosts that had haunted him for so long, the faces of men he'd killed, the family he'd lost, the loneliness that had been his constant companion seemed to recede, replaced by the warm certainty of Tabitha's love. They were married in the spring, when desert wildflowers carpeted the landscape in brilliant colors. The entire town turned out for the celebration, the same church where they'd first met now decorated with ribbons and flowers for their wedding. Sheriff Martin stood as Knox's best man, while Lucy, Tabitha's assistant, served as maid of honor. Even Doc Young rose to the occasion, remaining sober long enough to walk his niece down the aisle with dignity. As Tabitha approached in her ivory gown, a crown of wildflowers in her dark hair, Knox could scarcely believe his good fortune. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice carrying through the packed church. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Knox Blackwood and Tabitha Young in holy matrimony." The ceremony passed in a blur for Knox, who could focus only on Tabitha's radiant face and the feel of her hands in his as they exchanged vows. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheers from the congregation seemed distant compared to the thundering of his own heart as he kissed his bride. The reception that followed at the town hall was boisterous and joyful. Children ran between tables decorated with spring blossoms. Old-timers told increasingly exaggerated stories about both the bride and groom, and the dancing continued well into the night. As Knox and Tabitha swayed together to a slow fiddle tune, she rested her head against his chest. "Happy, Mrs. Blackwood?" he asked, still savoring the sound of her new name. She looked up at him, love shining in her amber eyes. "Perfectly happy, Mr. Blackwood, though I do have one regret." Knox tensed slightly. "What's that?" "That we wasted so much time," she replied with a smile. "If you hadn't been so stubborn about staying uninvolved." "If I recall correctly," Knox countered, relaxing, "you were quite focused on your medical practice when we first met." "True," Tabitha acknowledged, "but I noticed you immediately, even before you noticed me." This surprised Knox. "What do you mean?" "At the church social," she explained. "I saw you the moment I arrived, the tall, dangerous-looking man pretending not to watch everyone in the room. I asked Sheriff Martin about you before I even took off my shawl." Knox chuckled, spinning her gently as the music swelled. "And here I thought I was being subtle, watching you all evening." "About as subtle as a buffalo in a china shop," Tabitha teased. "Every woman in that room knew exactly where your attention had gone." Her expression softened. "I'm glad it was me." "It could only ever have been you," Knox replied, his voice low and sincere. "I walked past every woman in that town, Tabitha, until I saw you." The years that followed brought changes both expected and surprising to Knox and Tabitha Blackwood. They expanded the small house at the edge of town, adding rooms as their family grew, first with the birth of their daughter Catherine in 1878, followed by twin boys, Michael and James, in 1880. Knox continued as deputy sheriff, eventually taking over as sheriff when Martin retired in 1881. His reputation as a fair but uncompromising lawman spread throughout the territory, and Redemption Springs prospered under the security his presence provided. Tabitha's medical practice flourished as well. When her uncle passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1879, she took over as the town's primary physician. She mentored Lucy into becoming a skilled midwife and nurse, and together they saved countless lives. When the railroad finally reached Redemption Springs in 1882, Tabitha used the improved connection to order modern medical equipment and keep abreast of new techniques from Eastern hospitals. On a warm summer evening in 1883, Knox sat on their expanded porch, watching his children play in the yard as the sun set behind the distant mountains. Catherine, at 5, already showed signs of her mother's intelligence and determination. The 3-year-old twins had inherited their father's affinity for physical activity, constantly climbing, running, and occasionally fighting until Tabitha's firm voice separated them. "Penny for your thoughts," Tabitha said, settling into the rocking chair beside him and handing him a cup of coffee. Knox smiled, taking the cup with one hand while the other reached for hers. "Just thinking about how different my life would be if I hadn't stopped in Redemption Springs that summer." "Still chasing bounties across the frontier," she suggested, her thumb tracing circles on his palm. "Probably," Knox acknowledged, "or dead in some forgotten town with no one to mourn me." He squeezed her hand. "Instead, I have all this. Any regrets?" Tabitha asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Knox watched as Catherine organized her brothers into some elaborate game involving a stick horse and what appeared to be a rescue mission. "Not one," he replied honestly. "Though I do miss those quiet Sunday rides we used to take before the children came along." Tabitha's eyes sparkled mischievously. "Mrs. Peterson offered to watch the children this Sunday, said her grandchildren would love the company. Did she now?" Knox raised an eyebrow, a slow smile spreading across his face. "And what did you have in mind for this rare day of freedom, Mrs. Blackwood?" "I thought we might pack a picnic," Tabitha suggested, "and ride out to that spot by the creek where you proposed the second time." Knox laughed at the memory. His first proposal at Christmas had been followed by a more elaborate one in the spring, at a beautiful spot along a creek outside of town. He'd wanted to give Tabitha the romantic proposal she deserved, complete with wildflowers and poetry he'd spent weeks memorizing. "I'd like that," he said, lifting her hand to his lips. "Though I make no promises about my poetry skills this time around, your other skills more than compensate," Tabitha replied with a boldness that still surprised and delighted him, even after years of marriage. As darkness fell and the children reluctantly came inside for supper, Knox reflected on the extraordinary turn his life had taken. From a solitary existence defined by violence and transience, he had found his way to this a home filled with laughter, a community that respected him, work that gave him purpose, and a woman who loved him despite knowing his darkest truths. Later that night, with the children finally asleep and the house quiet, Knox and Tabitha lay tangled together in their bed, her head resting on his chest as it had almost every night for the past 7 years. "You ever wonder about fate?" Tabitha asked sleepily, her fingers tracing the scar on his shoulder from a bullet he'd taken years before they met. "How so?" Knox replied, running his hand through her hair, still as captivated by its silken texture as he had been the first time he touched it. "If you had arrived in town a day later, or if I had been too busy to attend that social." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him in the moonlight streaming through the window. "We might never have met." Knox considered this, remembering the inexplicable impulse that had led him to Redemption Springs when his original destination had been a town 30 miles farther west. "I don't know about fate," he said finally, "but I do know that from the moment I saw you, nothing else mattered. Not the bounty, not my plans to move on, nothing." Tabitha smiled, laying her head back on his chest. "The notorious gunslinger with a heart, after all. Don't tell anyone," Knox murmured, his arms tightening around her. "I have a reputation to maintain." Her soft laughter was the last thing he heard before drifting into sleep, secure in the knowledge that whatever fate or chance had brought them together, their love had been a choice, one they continued to make every day, through challenges and joys alike. And each morning when Knox Blackwood woke beside Tabitha, he remembered that moment in the church social when he had walked past every woman in town, until he stopped dead at the sight of her, the woman who had taught him that even a man with his past could find redemption, purpose, and love. 20 years later, Redemption Springs had grown from a small frontier outpost to a thriving town of over 2,000 souls. The railroad had brought prosperity, with hotels, restaurants, and shops lining what had once been a dusty main street. Electric lights now illuminated the thoroughfare, and automobiles occasionally puttered alongside horses and wagons. Sheriff Knox Blackwood, his dark hair now liberally streaked with silver, still cut an imposing figure as he made his daily rounds. At 58, he moved more deliberately than in his younger days, but the townsfolk still regarded him with a mixture of respect and affection that had been earned through decades of fair and steadfast service. "Morning, Sheriff," called Mr. Peterson, the third generation of his family to run the general store. "Beautiful day for Catherine's wedding, isn't it?" Knox nodded, unable to suppress a smile despite the tangle of emotions the day brought. "Couldn't have asked for better weather," he agreed, glancing at the cloudless blue sky. "Your wife still planning to do the flowers, already at your place," Peterson confirmed. "Been there since dawn, according to my boy," said Dr. Tabitha's running around like a whirlwind, making sure everything's perfect. Knox chuckled, easily imagining his wife directing operations with the same efficiency she brought to her medical practice. "Better finish my rounds then, wouldn't want to be late for my own daughter's wedding." As he continued down the street, Knox reflected on how quickly the years had passed. Catherine, now 25, had grown into a remarkable young woman brilliant like her mother, with a medical degree from a university back east and plans to join Tabitha's practice. Her fiancé, David Turner, was the railroad station manager, a steady, kind man whom Knox had come to respect. The twins, Michael and James, now 23, had taken different paths. Michael had followed his father into law enforcement, serving as a deputy in the growing county. James, always the more academically inclined of the two, had studied law and recently returned to Open Redemption Springs' first proper law office. Knox completed his morning duties and headed home, where their property had expanded over the years to include a larger house, a separate building for Tabitha's medical practice, and gardens that were the envy of the town. As he approached, he could see the flurry of activity chairs being arranged in the garden, white ribbons decorating the arbor where the ceremony would take place, and townspeople carrying dishes for the reception. He slipped through the side door, hoping to reach his bedroom unnoticed to change into his formal attire, but was intercepted by Tabitha in the hallway. "There you are," she exclaimed, her amber eyes bright with excitement despite the stress of the day. At 53, Tabitha remained as beautiful to Knox as she had been that first night, though her dark hair now held streaks of gray and fine lines marked the corners of her eyes. "I was beginning to think you'd run off to avoid wearing that new suit," Knox smiled, pulling her into a quick embrace. "Tempting, but I wouldn't miss this for the world." He glanced around at the organized chaos. "Everything under control, as much as it can be," Tabitha sighed, straightening his collar. "The boys are helping set up the last of the chairs. Catherine is upstairs with Lucy and her daughters, getting ready." Her voice caught slightly. "She looks beautiful, Knox." He saw the sheen of tears in his wife's eyes and understood. Their firstborn, their daughter who had once been a tiny bundle in their arms, was beginning her own journey today. "Like her mother," Knox said softly, brushing a strand of hair from Tabitha's face. "Always beautiful." Tabitha's smile was radiant despite her emotional state. "Charmer, now go get dressed. You have less than an hour before you need to walk our daughter down the aisle." Knox followed orders, finding his new suit laid out on their bed. As he changed, he could hear the sounds of the house, Tabitha directing last-minute arrangements, the twins arguing good-naturedly about something downstairs, Catherine's laughter drifting from her old bedroom where she was preparing. When he was dressed, Knox hesitated at Catherine's door, then knocked gently. "Come in," his daughter called. Nothing could have prepared him for the sight that greeted him. Catherine stood in the center of the room in her wedding gown, a creation of white satin and lace that seemed to capture the sunlight streaming through the windows. Her dark hair, so like Tabitha's, was arranged with orange blossoms and a delicate veil. "What do you think, Papa?" she asked, her voice betraying a rare vulnerability. For a moment, Knox couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. All the years flashed before him, Catherine taking her first steps, riding her first pony, crying over a skinned knee, announcing her intention to become a doctor like her mother, leaving for university, returning as a confident young physician. "You're perfect," he finally managed, his voice rough with emotion. David is the luckiest man alive. Catherine's eyes, blue like his own, filled with tears. I learned from the best, you know, watching you and Mama all these years. That's how I knew what real love looks like. Knox crossed the room and carefully embraced his daughter, mindful of her dress and veil. Your mother deserves the credit for that. I was just a lost soul until she found me. You're both terrible at accepting compliments, Catherine laughed, pulling back to look up at him. The great Sheriff Blackwood, feared by outlaws across the territory, reduced to tears by his daughter in a white dress. Don't tell anyone, Knox replied with mock seriousness. I have a reputation to maintain. The exchange, so similar to countless conversations with Tabitha over the years, made them both laugh, easing the emotional tension of the moment. The ceremony itself was everything Catherine had dreamed of, intimate, yet attended by nearly the entire town. Solemn yet joyful. Knox felt a complicated mix of pride and loss as he walked his daughter down the aisle and placed her hand in David's, symbolically entrusting her future to another man's care. As he took his place beside Tabitha, she squeezed his hand in understanding. They had discussed this moment many times in the quiet of their bedroom, the bittersweet recognition that their children's happiness meant watching them build lives of their own, sometimes far from the home they had created. The reception lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing under lanterns strung throughout the garden. Knox and Tabitha moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and reminiscing with old friends about their own wedding 27 years earlier. May I have this dance, Mrs. Blackwood? Knox asked as the musicians began a waltz that had been popular when they were young. Tabitha smiled, placing her hand in his. Always, Mr. Blackwood. As they moved across the improvised dance floor, other couples stepped aside respectfully. Despite the passage of years, Knox and Tabitha still moved together with the easy grace of two people perfectly attuned to each other's rhythms. What are you thinking? Tabitha asked, noting the contemplative look in her husband's eyes. That I'm the luckiest man alive, Knox replied honestly. And that I'm not quite sure what to do with myself now that our youngest are grown and our daughter is married. Tabitha's eyes twinkled mischievously. Well, there's always retirement. We could travel, see those places we've only read about. Or you could finally write those memoirs the governor keeps pestering you about. Retirement, Knox pretended to be scandalized. At my age, why, I'm in my prime, woman. Indeed you are, Tabitha agreed with a warmth that still had the power to make his heart race. Though perhaps it's time to let Michael take on more responsibility as deputy. He's ready, Knox. Knox nodded, acknowledging the truth of her words. Their son had proven himself capable and level-headed, respected by the community just as Knox had been at his age. And what about you? He asked. Any plans to turn your practice over to Catherine? Gradually, Tabitha replied. There's enough need for 2 doctors in town now, but I'm not quite ready to hang up my stethoscope entirely. The music ended and they stayed on the dance floor as the musicians began a slower, more intimate melody. Knox held Tabitha closer, savoring the familiar weight of her in his arms. Do you ever regret it? He asked quietly. Staying in Redemption Springs all these years when you could have practiced medicine in a big city hospital? Tabitha looked up at him, her expression serious. Not for a single moment. Everything I've ever wanted has been right here, my work, our children, our life together. She reached up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his weathered skin. What about you? Do you ever miss the excitement of your bounty hunting days? Knox thought about the lonely years before Redemption Springs, the emptiness that had driven him from town to town, the absence of anything resembling home or family. Never, he said with absolute certainty. Though I do sometimes wonder what would have happened if I hadn't walked into that church social the night you arrived. I would have found you anyway, Tabitha replied with confidence. Some things are simply meant to be, Knox Blackwood. As the celebration continued around them, Knox reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought him to this moment, from a solitary gunslinger with a reputation for coldness to a husband, father, and respected lawman with deep roots in a community he loved. He thought of all the women he had walked past in town after town, year after year, never stopping, never connecting, never allowing himself to imagine a different kind of life. Until that night in 1876, when he had stopped dead at the sight of Tabitha, young, the woman who had taught him that even the most wounded heart could heal, that even the most solitary soul could find belonging. "I love you, Tabitha," he said, the words as true now as they had been the first time he'd spoken them in her uncle's surgery room all those years ago. "And I love you," she replied, her smile illuminating the gathering darkness as the first stars appeared above Redemption Springs. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the days we have left." As Knox held his wife close under the starlit sky, surrounded by the family and community they had built together, he knew with absolute certainty that stopping for Tabitha had been the wisest decision of his life, the moment when his true journey had finally begun. Epilogue Autumn, 1910. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the porch of the Blackwood home as Knox settled into his favorite rocking chair, a worn leather-bound journal open on his lap. At 74, his once imposing frame had grown leaner, though he still carried himself with the straight-backed dignity that had been his hallmark as sheriff for over 3 decades. "Grandpa, are you writing your stories again?" 8-year-old Thomas, Catherine's middle child, bounded onto the porch with the boundless energy of youth. Knox smiled, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. "Just making some notes. Your grandmother insists these old adventures of mine might be worth something someday." "Can you tell me about the Jennings gang again?" Thomas pleaded, settling at Knox's feet with the air of one prepared for a lengthy narrative. "The real story, not the one in the dime novels." "Those writers got it all wrong," Knox agreed with a chuckle. "For starters, I wasn't alone when I tracked them to Bitter Creek Canyon, had 7 good men with me." "But you were the one who caught Calvin Jennings himself," Thomas insisted, having heard the story enough times to know the important details. "That I did," Knox acknowledged. "Though the real hero of that day was your grandmother. She saved Sheriff Martin's life after he was shot, worked straight through the night to remove the bullet and stop the bleeding." Thomas nodded solemnly. "Grandma says medicine is as much about courage as it is about knowledge." "Your grandmother is a wise woman," Knox replied. "Always has been." The sound of an automobile approaching drew their attention. A sleek black Model T appeared on the long drive leading to the house, unusual enough in Redemption Springs to be noteworthy. "It's Uncle James," Thomas exclaimed, jumping to his feet. "And he's brought someone with him." Knox squinted, his eyesight not what it once was. "Looks like your cousin Sarah is with him." The car came to a stop, and James Blackwood, now a distinguished attorney of 43 with political ambitions, helped his 19-year-old daughter from the passenger seat. "Father," James called, waving as he and Sarah approached the porch. "Hope we're not interrupting your storytelling session." Knox closed his journal and set it aside. "Never too busy for family. What brings you two out from town?" "Sarah has news," James replied, beaming with paternal pride. "Go on, tell your grandfather." The young woman, who strongly resembled Tabitha in her younger years, stepped forward with an envelope clutched in her hands. "I've been accepted to medical school, Grandpa, just like grandmother and Aunt Catherine." Knox's face broke into a wide smile. "Well now, that's something to celebrate. 3 generations of Blackwood women in medicine." "Where's grandmother?" Sarah asked, looking toward the house. "I wanted to tell you both together, making rounds," Knox replied. "Even at 70, your grandmother can't quite give up her patients, but she should be back soon." As if summoned by the conversation, the sound of hoofbeats announced Tabitha's arrival. Though automobiles had become more common, she still preferred her reliable mare for visiting patients in the outlying areas. Knox watched as his wife of 34 years dismounted with the grace of a much younger woman, her medical bag slung over her shoulder. Her hair had turned completely silver, elegantly coiled at the nape of her neck, but her amber eyes remained as bright and observant as ever. "What's this?" she called, noting the gathering on the porch. "A family council without me, grandmother." Sarah rushed down the steps to embrace Tabitha. I've been accepted to medical school, just got the letter today. Tabitha's face lit with joy as she held her granddaughter at arm's length. I knew you would be. Oh, my dear, I'm so proud of you. The family moved inside as evening approached, gathering around the large dining table that had hosted countless celebrations and ordinary meals throughout the decades. Michael and his wife arrived with their 3 children, followed by Catherine and David with their brood, creating the happy chaos of a full house. As Knox looked around at the assembled faces, his children and grandchildren, all thriving in their chosen paths, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. From the solitary existence he had once led, this abundance of love and connection still sometimes seemed miraculous. Later, after the younger children had been put to bed and the adults had moved to the parlor for coffee, the conversation turned to the changes sweeping the nation and the world. They're saying we might join this European war before long, Michael commented, now sheriff himself after Knox's retirement. Governor's already talking about organizing state militias, just in case. Surely it won't come to that, Catherine responded, her physician's instinct to protect evident in her tone. America has no business in a European conflict. The world is smaller than it used to be, James observed thoughtfully. What happens across an ocean affects us all now. As the discussion continued, Knox exchanged a glance with Tabitha. Both thinking of the many changes they had witnessed in their lifetime, from a frontier where news traveled at the speed of a horse to a world connected by telegraphs, telephones, and now even wireless communication. When the younger generations finally departed, promising to gather again for Sunday dinner, Knox and Tabitha found themselves alone in the quiet house that had seen so much life. "Come sit with me," Tabitha said, taking Knox's hand and leading him to the porch where they had spent countless evenings watching the sun set over the land they both loved. They settled into their rocking chairs, a matching pair carved by Knox's own hands during the winter after his retirement. The evening air was cool but not cold, scented with sage and the last roses of the season from Tabitha's garden. "Sarah will make a fine doctor," Knox observed, thinking of his granddaughter's determined expression. "She has your hands steady and sure." Tabitha smiled, reaching across to take his hand in hers. "And your courage. Did I ever tell you that watching you pursue the Jennings gang was what finally convinced me I was in love with you, not just attracted or interested, but truly in love?" "You never mentioned that," Knox replied, surprised even after all these years to learn something new about their courtship. "It wasn't the bravery itself," Tabitha explained. "It was that you organized the posse properly, made sure everyone knew the risks, and had a clear plan. You didn't rush in recklessly. You valued your life because you had something to live for." Her fingers tightened around his. "That's when I knew you were a man I could build a future with." Knox brought her hand to his lips, kissing the knuckles that had healed so many wounds, delivered so many babies, and aged so gracefully alongside his own. "Best decision I ever made," he said quietly, "stopping in Redemption Springs that summer." "Best decision I ever made was coming west," Tabitha countered. "Even though I was terrified of leaving everything familiar behind." They fell into comfortable silence, rocking gently as darkness settled over the landscape. The first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the sky, the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting, their wedding, the births of their children, and all the ordinary days that had formed the tapestry of their shared life. "What do you think happens next?" Knox asked finally, voicing the question that had been increasingly on his mind as he entered the twilight of his life. "For us, I mean." Tabitha understood what he was asking. At their age, with friends and contemporaries increasingly passing on, thoughts of mortality were natural. "I think," she said slowly, "that whatever comes after this life, we face it together, just as we've faced everything else." She turned to look at him, her expression serene in the gathering dusk. "I can't imagine any power in heaven or earth that could separate us now, Knox Blackwood." Knox nodded, finding comfort in her certainty. "I walked past every woman in town until I saw you," he reminded her, echoing words he had spoken many times throughout their marriage. I'd recognize you anywhere in any life, in any form, and I'd find you, Tabitha promised, always. As night embraced Redemption Springs, Knox and Tabitha Blackwood continued their gentle rocking, hands intertwined, hearts beating in the synchronized rhythm of two lives so thoroughly woven together that they had become, in all the ways that mattered, one. From a solitary gunslinger who had never allowed himself to imagine permanence, to a husband, father, grandfather, and respected elder of a community he had helped to build, Knox's journey had been unexpected and extraordinary. And at every step, Tabitha had been there, challenging him, supporting him, loving him through darkness and light. Whatever tomorrow might bring, whatever changes might come to their town or their world, this essential truth remained constant. In a moment of perfect cosmic timing, Knox Blackwood had walked past every woman in town until he stopped dead at the sight of her, and in that stopping, he had found not just love, but home.